Okay, the world has changed rapidly and we need to come through some topics that are very relevant at the moment, and that's to do with the coronavirus situation and how that's impacting both legislation, owners' requirements, practical requirements. There's a whole bunch of things we need to cover. So we've been inundated, our property managers, our salespeople, support staff, from both landlords and tenants. And look, typical questions that we're getting are, do I have to give a rent reduction? Okay, fair question to ask. What if my tenant's not impacted with their job situation or hours of work? What if they want a rent reduction? How do we handle that? What are we doing? All really relevant questions as well. How will the new JobKeeper allowance change things? Quite significantly, and we'll touch on that as well shortly. Here's a great question. Is it true that I can't kick my tenant out for the next 6 months? Let's talk about that shortly. A really good common question, and one we may or may not be able to answer specifically, but in generally is, will my landlord insurance, if you have landlord protection insurance, which we definitely encouraged owners in recent years to take out, will that cover me? And so, it leads to some other questions. What do I do if my tenant stops paying rent? It's a pretty good question. How do we handle that? Can I still take the tenant to NCAT? Is NCAT still open? All very good questions. And the final part I want to cover tonight is going to be about, can people explain to me what's the difference between rent relief, a rent reduction, a rent-free period, or a payment plan? Now, on the surface, you may just think that's semantics, but it has some fundamental importance to the way we go about acting in your behalf. So that's what I want to cover. There's a lot to cover tonight. And again, just like Martin's opportunity, there'll be plenty of scope for you to shoot us off some questions, and we'll do our utmost to answer those. Bearing in mind, as we said, it took 10 years for the tenancy legislation that Martin spoke about to come into action in March, and it took about 10 days for the legislation amended Emergency Measures Bill 2020 to come into action. And whether we like it or not, we have to work with it. I'd hate to be in government at the moment trying to navigate the challenges that society's got at the moment, both economic and from a human aspect as well. So there's a lot to cover. Let me get into it, and I'm looking forward to some questions that come through as we go on. And again, we'll do our best to answer them. This will also be available afterwards to record, and we're happy to send that out to you as well. Okay. Typically tonight, though, I really want to focus, whilst tenancy legislation largely rolls around commercial, retail tenancies, and residential tenancies. Tonight is pretty much just going to focus on residential tenancies, which is where the bulk of our clients react on behalf of them. And again, thanks to them all for joining us tonight. And I can see there's quite a few of them who are obviously keen to know what's happening in the marketplace, and particularly COVID-19 related matters. Let me also just start by saying, last Sunday night, I sent out an email to each and every one of our landlords. And it was an amazing response, just how, and humbling, and the amazing generosity shown by a vast majority of clients, and equally a lot of clients who are extremely nervous about the ramifications of what happens if my tenant stops paying, and totally understand that. There's a lot of people very nervous. And I think equally we're seeing the best and worst in human society coming out at the moment. We've got tenants who are doing the right thing, bending over backwards, doing everything they can to comply with their obligations under the tenancy agreement. And that, in itself is very humbling. The other extreme, and I've got to share a story with you, that one of our property managers during the week, as soon as that emergency legislation was passed, sent an email to the property manager that went along the lines of, just letting you know, I'm stopping paying the rent for the next 6 months. I'm getting a dog, and by the way, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, I've got to tell you, there is something we can do about it, and we're going to touch on that as we go through tonight. But they're the two extremes, and obviously, you know, calmer heads have got to prevail with the winds that are blowing at the moment. I know there's a lot of angst out there in the community, in the industry as well, about misinformation, about what you can do, what you can't do. And again, as I introduced, all the questions that are typically coming through at the moment. So hopefully after tonight, there'll be a little bit more certainty. Not saying you're going to like some of the answers, and I'm not saying I've got all of the answers, but certainly I've got confidence that after tonight, you'll be a lot more informed. There will be more webinars along this. As I said, there are changes happening almost on a daily and hourly basis, and new incentives and opportunities for landlords and tenants are yet to be announced. So obviously it's a very moving target, and we can only play cards with the hand we're dealt at the moment. And so obviously the recommendations, advice that we give you tonight may change, and if it does, we are doing our absolute utmost. And I know our property managers are absolutely, and I'll give a big shout out to them. I know they're watching tonight. You are doing a splendid job. I know it's tough. We'll talk about the spikes. It's a bit like Corona. I think there will be a spike, and the next couple of weeks will be challenging, but absolutely I think things will settle down as we progress through that. I've got no doubt, and I'll give you my reasons why shortly. So first of all, I need to start with, again, the response we got from our clients was very much humbling, and some have been extremely generous, in my commercial opinion, way too generous, more than they needed to be, for people who in some cases are not even affected at all. And again, so I'm not criticizing, I'm not judging people who make decisions. Our job is, our fiduciary responsibility is first and foremost to act in our clients' best interests, okay? And absolutely we will do that. So the information we're going to give you tonight, the decision is only as good as the facts. We want to present the facts, and at the end of the day, if clients want to make decisions contrary to our recommendations, absolutely we'll support that as well. So I just wanted to put a little caveat in there, because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about, some people may perceive that we might be a little bit too harsh on the tenants and not compassionate enough. Well, I can absolutely assure you that is not happening. There is a lot of compassion out there, but equally there's a lot of tenants trying to take the mickey out of clients and take advantage of, and that doesn't sit well with me either. So let me move on to the point at hand. I guess, as I keep saying to all of our teams, there are things that we can control and there are things that we can't control. We can't control Corona, it's there. Other people smarter than me are dealing with that, and deal with it they will, and that will come to an end. So there are certain things we can control, and there are certain things we know, and there are certain things we don't know. So let's start with what we do know. What we do know. Well, I know our property managers are working hard, that's one thing, but also know, and as of about half an hour ago, we did a check on how many tenants have actually requested or seeking some form of rent relief, or even inquiring or requesting. And you'd be very interested to know, at the moment it's sitting just over 11% of our tenants of the portfolios that we manage have actually come forward and asked. I'm going to touch on that a little bit later, and what does that really mean. So that's an interesting statistic. We do know that. What we also know is that the government this week announced a $130 billion, that's $1 billion package to try and keep Australia working, the job keeper allowance. And that is an absolute game changer. Tenants who were beside themselves a week ago, and ones that are on the cusp of being stood down through no fault of their own, that is going to save a lot of people's jobs. It's going to give them an opportunity, and more importantly, I guess from our perspective and our clients' perspective, better chance of your rent being paid. So I'm going to touch on that. That we do know. What else do we know? We do know that unemployment in February in Australia was around 5%. We do know that. What we don't know is just how long this is going to last and what would be the worst case scenario. And let's take unemployment as an example. If unemployment clearly has risen, will rise. To what extent? I guess the number of people requesting, I think, has a reflection on that. But if we look at history and challenges and crises that Australia and the world have had, it would not be unlikely that unemployment rates might go to 15%, 20%, even 25%. But I want to put that into context. If you take out the first 5%, there's people who've been unemployed for some time. The commercial reality is that those people are probably not tenants of our clients. We don't very often put in people who don't have a job. So when you factor that in, it means that around 80 to 85% of people are going to be in a very comfortable position to continue paying rent. And the statistics that I just went through, I think, demonstrate that point. So I guess those that are having requests, and we'll talk through the process in a moment, but what are your obligations for rent relief? Do you have to give rent relief? Great question. But before I answer that question, let's just look at the commercial analysis of what a tenancy agreement actually is. Firstly, it's a legal binding contract between two parties. And the contract has rights and obligations. And the obligations are quite simply to pay the rent. It's a pretty important obligation on behalf of the tenant. Now, with the passing of the new legislation that came in last week, the Legislative Amendment Emergency Measures Bill 2020, I've had a cursory look through it. I understand it reasonably well, and there is nowhere in that legislation that says that you actually have to give a tenant rent relief. Let's make that perfectly clear. There is no obligation to do it. That being said, we've got to take a very pragmatic and practical approach about this. The other reality we've got to look at is under Schedule 12, Part 13, I believe it is. The reality is that over the next 6 months, tenancies will not be able to be terminated in the normal fashion through NCAT. That's the New South Wales Civil Administrative Tribunal, the place we traditionally go for tenant issues and disputes. We just won't be able to make an application there. They're not going to be receiving them. So the reality is we won't be able to get possession in any case for the next 6 months. So I guess the enforcement of termination orders have effectively been suspended. The other question that quite often has come to us, well, is NCAT shut down? The answer is no, they're not. They're actually still in operation, be it in the new form, like tonight. They're doing it via video, Facebook, telephone, exchange of documents via post. They're just not seeing the traditional face-to-face, and we've all had to adapt to that. So they are still available. They're just not hearing matters relating to evictions pertaining to a tenant who might be in arrears. We'll talk about whether they're rightfully in arrears or not in arrears. We'll come back to that shortly. So NCAT is still certainly open. Again, I'm clear on it that there is no obligation to give rent relief. However, there's always a caveat on these things. However, we need to look at the really practical realities that in some cases, some genuine cases, tenants simply won't be able to meet their obligations to pay rent. And again, I've just got to reiterate the processes that we're going through with our property managers to keep our clients up to date. If you're a landlord of ours and you haven't heard from your property manager, then let's for a moment assume that that's all good news. There is no request from your tenant. But the reality, currently around 11% of our tenants have approached our property managers to discuss that. So a lot of clients, naturally, their first reaction is, what do we do? Do we have to give it? Do we don't have to give it? You know, the generosity has been incredible. In some cases, in my opinion, way too generous, in the sense that, you know, the person doesn't need relief, but they're just feeling like they want to do that. And I'm going to cover, you know, the merits of that. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying do it with all the facts in front of you, if that's ultimately what you choose to do. So the first step, I guess, is that we're being asked is, well, what's the process that you're using to find out are these tenant situations legitimate? And that's a very valid question to ask. The other question before I get that, sorry, reading off my notes. The question that's been thrown to us, and I need to predicate this before I talk about our process, it's very important. The question I raised earlier is does landlord insurance, landlord protection insurance cover me if my tenant stops paying rent in such circumstances? I wish I could give you a definitive black and white answer. The reality is that there are multiple policies out there with different underwriters. Our underwriters that we've approached haven't been able to get back to us with a clear definition of what may or may not be covered. Preliminary feedback that we're getting, and please don't assume that this is a foregone conclusion. Again, some policies may, some policies may not. But the feedback that I'm getting universally is that if it is, and you choose to give your tenant a reduction in rent, or a suspension, or some other benefit, with no obligation to pay it back, then in some instances it might potentially void that part of the claim or limit that part of the claim. So we've got to be very careful when we start making decisions like that, and I'll touch on our recommendations shortly. Now, we have been recommending to our clients, there are only a couple of really good specific landlord insurers out there that specifically cater really to the landlord. A lot of banks might tell you, a lot of the large insurance companies might tell you, oh yeah, we have a landlord product. From my experience, they're not really good. The bank ones in particular, really just covering the bank's interest. In some cases, they might only cover you for 6 weeks in this current crisis. That's really not going to cut the mustard. So again, I hope that our insurers that we have suggested to our clients come to the party, but obviously that's a moving target, and we'll certainly keep you posted on that. The reason I say that is because I need you to be conscious of the steps that our property managers are taking when a tenant does approach us for rent relief. So the first step is said, if you haven't been contacted with your property manager, by our property manager, that's a good sign. But what the property manager is doing, the first step they're doing when they've got such a request, and I've got to start by saying that we are absolutely empathetic, caring, understanding. There is no way we're judgmental of tenants. We accept that, through circumstances, we have to give people initially the benefit and be quite empathetic. So I can assure you that our property managers are very much empathetic towards tenants who are coming forward. That being said, we have found out, unfortunately, there are some tenants who are just trying to take advantage of the situation. And again, the best in society and the worst society is coming out at the moment. That being said, the first thing our property managers will do is go back to the application when your tenant applied for the property and have a look at their situation. What industry were they in? What was their salary? And we did verify that using our due diligence before they would have moved in anyway. So we do know what salary they were on. We also look at other factors there. Can you please give us a copy of a termination or separation certificate or confirmation you've been stood down, or show me the pay slips. We just want to verify it because we're trying to be fully transparent. Help us help you, so that when we do go to our client, we can actually give our client all the facts so that they can make an informed decision. How many people in the household are bringing in income? Non-Australian residents, we do have a few of those who may not have the benefit of our wonderful society that is very generous and caring, where they've got to make do. There are still avenues available for them that we're working through with people in that situation as well. So I guess, again, that's the first step, is to clarify. Now, I've got to say, when we have put that challenge, I guess, or that transparency that we're seeking from a tenant to them, There have been ones who've said, oh, that's great, leave it with me, I'll get back to you. And they haven't. Draw your own conclusions there. So again, that 11% of requests, that's been since this whole situation came up. We might see that climb up, it might level off. That's certainly a KPI that we'll be very much keeping an eye on and keeping you in the loop. So the next step that will follow is encourage where it is genuine and we believe it's genuine and we'll recommend to you, is firstly to come up with a payment plan. Now, a lot of property managers in our industry, not Devine, I know of, have entered into payment plans with tenants for a 6-month period because that's the period of the emergency legislation that's in place. The challenge that we have, and I've got to give Mel Tinapay a shout out here for coming up with the light bulb moment, and I'm glad she did, and I'll cover why she did, is that we are recommending our clients payment plans and suggestions, but we're only doing it on a month-to-month basis. And why was that a great idea? Because had these clients had in place a 6-month plan and the new job keeper allowance came in, many tenants are actually, in some cases, actually better off. And so why should you have offered them a $200 effective, and I'll come back to the terminology, whether it was a discount, rebate, or deferment, why? It was unnecessary. And so a month-to-month, people's situations could change, as I alluded to. The government may very well make more announcements and make more incentives to keep people in rental accommodation as well. So we just don't know what may or may not be around the corner. And I think committing a client to a 6-month payment plan when the goalposts are constantly changing, we don't know what will change. I think it's prudent just to go on a month-by-month basis, and that's what we'll be recommending to. So I think that was a brilliant idea, and thanks for that one, Mel. And I'm glad we haven't rushed in because, again, the job keeper allowance for many of our tenants, for the economy, for people's mental well-being has absolutely been a game changer. But if there's one thing out of tonight's webinar that I want people to take home, is this concept that rent is an obligation now to pay, just as your mortgage is an obligation to pay. Now, the banks have got up on their high horse and wondered how wonderful they are, and I'm sure this has been done with government assistance anyway, to say that, look, if you're in trouble, go to your bank and they'll give you a 6-month deferment of your mortgage commitments. And that sounds wonderful. Listen to the fine print. They are not saying, we'll forgive 6 months, you don't have to pay it, it's all yours, keep it. Absolutely not. That just gets tacked on to the end of your loan term, and there may be slight extra cost, interest on interest, but the bottom line, you've got to pay that money back to the bank. And so when we look at the greater picture here, and owners, generous, well-meaning owners, go and give a discount or free rent to a tenant, let's look at who is really subsidized. The banks aren't going to lose. The tenant's in front, and the one carrying the can is the landlord. Now, some owners are okay with that. Commercially, I have some reservations with that, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So just remember, what we are recommending is a payment plan that defers the obligation to pay that rent for the 6 months potentially, or month to month, to a future date. Now, the reality is, and let's take an example, if we had a $100 rent decrease, in 26 months' time, the tenant will owe $2,600. Now, in 6 months' time, assuming everything goes back to some form of new normality, the tenant will be obligated to go back to paying the pre-arrangement rent. But they are still now obligated to pay back that $2,600. Now, the commercial reality, again, we'd be recommending, subject to circumstances, that we come to a term, maybe a payment plan with that tenant to continue paying that back. Some owners, and again, this led me to a question from one of our landlords, emailed me earlier today, Felicity, who got on the front foot very generously, and I don't believe she's aware of the tenant's circumstances, whether they do need genuine relief or not. But notwithstanding, she put forward, I think, forgive me for giving the wrong numbers out, but I think it was like a $200 a week discount on a rent of about $500 a week. And she said, look, I'm happy to give that, providing they keep paying the $300, but if they fail to pay the $300, then all bets are off and I want them to pay the full amount again. And conceptually, I'm with you, Felicity, I agree that makes perfect sense. The way we are encouraging our clients to structure it absolutely will nail that scenario for you, Felicity. And it's a great point that you raised. Having a payment plan where the tenant is obligated to continue the rent they've committed to will certainly get us through those situations. And I'll give you another scenario that might play out. You know, we've had tenants, and I've got a tenant at the moment who's paying well over $2,000 a week, and we know they have the capacity to pay, and I believe their circumstances are they're one of the very fortunate people, and there's always winners and losers in everything, that's actually winning and winning big time. Their capacity to pay the rent is definitely not in question. They're hitting the owner up because they believe they can. Draw your own inference to whether that is right or wrong. Now, obviously subject to our client's instructions, what do you do with that? What if the dog man that I referred to earlier stops paying rent for 6 months? Can we kick him out? Unfortunately, as much as I'd like to say it, the reality is no, we can't. Does that mean we just tear up that 6 months of rent? You know, again, hopefully in some cases, landlord insurance will cover a fair chunk of that, I would hope, yet to be resolved if you were astute enough to take out landlord insurance. But just think of your bank and think of rent in similar terms. If you went on a bank holiday of interest for 6 months and then decided, no, I don't want to pay it, would the bank accept that? Clearly they wouldn't. And so in a scenario where someone just decides they're going to stop paying rent, our recommendation is, and from insurance is, we still have to follow the processes. 14 days behind the rent, 15th day, serve them a termination notice, knowing full well that they're not going to enforce that, they're not going to act on it. But from a protocol point of view, we follow the process and steps. So come 6 months' time, when we do make our application to NCAT, might be a bit of a backlog back then, I would imagine, but when we eventually have a hearing, which we no doubt will, and the tenants have accumulated 6 or 7 months worth of rent, there will be a judgment in all likelihood against that tenant. Now, the reality is, in some cases where the rent is quite high, NCAT will not have the jurisdiction because the amount they can actually hear is limited, which would then put you into the next court, which could potentially be the district court or the local courts. Most landlord insurances actually have, I think some of them we have got about a $5,000 legal fee, and I would encourage our owners to take advantage of that and pursue those tenants, because they're the same tenants who actually can afford it, who will be worried about their credit ratings. And if you do get a judgment against them and they do owe 7 months worth of rent, sure, you may or may not get them out of them, but if it does go and affect their credit rating, their ability to move on, I think you will see a fair bit of money come back. By and large, though, most tenants are absolutely doing the right thing, and we're absolutely encouraging that. But again, the best and worst in society, and again, we've got to guide you through the multiple challenges that we're certainly facing at the moment. So, absolutely, there's a stack of questions coming through that I'd like to answer for you. So, in summary, before I go on to those questions, let me find my notes here. Okay, so have I covered everything tonight for you? Let me just check this off. So in summary, the bullet points you need to take home with you. For the next 6 months, there's not going to be the ability to terminate a tenant for non-payment of rent. There is no obligation on you to reduce the rent. However, in genuine situations of hardship, we are recommending that we do. And look, by and large, most tenants are good, genuine people who I think will make an effort to get out of this situation. You know, through no fault of their own. I think most owners, most people are compassionate and understanding. We need to work with them in the right situation. So in the genuine situations of hardship, absolutely we would encourage owners to do that and come to a party with a payment plan. We would not recommend a rent reduction. We would not rent a period of free rent. It would be a payment plan. Now, whether in 6 months' time you choose to actually give that money back or part thereof, in essence, in my view, that is really good leverage, because we talk about situations, for example, where the owner is doing absolutely the right thing to try and accommodate the tenant. I know there's a mutual obligation for the tenants, I believe, to reciprocate that. So how about a scenario where the owner does the right thing, agrees to a rent reduction, or sorry, a rent deferment, let me get the terminology right, a rent deferment. And we ask, as our property managers are now, complying and looking after your interests, now we're doing a lot more virtual routine inspections. So we want to make sure that the tenant's actually looking after your property the way we would normally have gone out and physically inspected. So using technology, FaceTime, our property managers are asking the tenant, look, can you take me on an inspection of your property? Can you just walk me through the kitchen? Can you just open the cupboard up? Can you just show me this? So we've got a good sense of, are they looking after your property and your interests? So we're using that technology. What if the tenant says, no, bugger off, none of your business, go away, or I don't want you to see the dog that I've got? Or the reality that unfortunately we may face is that some owners may regrettably have to sell a property because of their circumstances. And the tenant turns around and says, no, bugger off, you're not going to get access, and we have to get in a fight whether we can or we can't. Now, is that very fair that the owner is doing the right thing, and where is the mutual obligation on behalf of the tenant? It cuts both ways. And so if there is a scenario where there is a rent deferment, the behaviour of the tenant, in my world, would largely dictate the generosity, whether the owner may at some future date demand that and take legal action to get it, or have some other payment plan or reduction, or in some cases even a forgiveness of that amount. But don't give that right up at the beginning, because I'm afraid in some instances the generosity of clients might come and bite them in the bum. So I'd rather be sorry you did a rent deferment and a payment plan rather than give all your goodwill and gestures up front. And again, our property managers would certainly talk you through that process. What else have we gone through tonight? Payment plans we're doing on a monthly basis. We're encouraging tenants who may be in a situation to actually break the lease. You know, from an owner's perspective, commercially, we've got to look at, well, do I pay someone give them half the rent or 3/4 of the rent, or better than having them move out and then releasing it? And on that point, our leasing team are doing an amazing job. They're out there, got to work a bucket load harder. Part of the new changes that came in from the Prime Minister announced that there are no more options and there are no more open for inspections. And actually got quite excited about that, because we've actually got to go back to the old days with grey hair, when you actually had to physically get someone in your car. Well, we're not allowed to get in the car now, but get out and talk to them and qualify them and find out their needs and their wants and have a decent conversation with people. And amazingly, we're actually now finding that people coming out, whether that's buyers or tenants, there's a lot more qualified. They're a lot more serious. You're going out there at the moment to buy or to rent. You're not there for sticky beating, tie kicking, which was, I guess, part of the course in the old regime. So that's, we're doing things a little bit differently now. We have to. We've got to come online. We're doing virtual inspections. That's been a good hit. So again, in this new world, we've got to adapt, we've got to change, we've got to rapidly change. And tonight is a really good example of how we're doing that. And I'm sure everyone's getting on board. So we're doing that. What else have we got out here that's changed? NCAT still open, but again, they're adapting to the new world with remote hearings. They are open to tenancy matters in regards to if your tenant is damaging the property seriously. We don't have to wait 6 months to act on that. That's something urgent. They will hear that. Equally, from the tenant's perspective, if the place is, through circumstances, dangerous or uninhabitable, the tenant will have the right to seek an application for NCAT potentially seek rectification, maybe end the tenancy. So again, and things like domestic violence, they're also things that are obviously definitely business as usual, or new usual anyway, in that regards. The JobKeeper allowance has been an absolute game changer. As I said, a lot of our tenants who, a lot of them sort of casual workers, lower paid workers, $1,500 a fortnight in some cases can be the difference where they can pay rent or not. In some cases, they're actually better off. So in those situations, again, when we're using due diligence and checking applications and just verifying, well, why should you have a rent reduction? You're actually earning more money now. Could say we might do rent increases, but that would be poor taste. No, we won't be doing that at the moment in this environment, in most cases. So that's pretty much from a commercial, pragmatic, what we're doing on behalf of our clients. Again, keep the questions coming. We'll answer as best we can. But just in summary, on a more human note, this crisis absolutely will end. Our health and well-being must be the priority. Regrettably, the massive economic price is something. If we've got to pay that massive economic price, then so be it. We all have to play our part. We all got to adapt, and adapting we are. There'll be sacrifices that we all have to make, but we will get through this. And I truly think as a society, at the end of this, we'll actually come out a lot more better for it. So thank you again for joining us tonight. And as per Martin, there has been a whole bunch of questions come through. I may or may not be able to answer them, but let's have a look. We have from Charlotte. Charlotte says, if my tenant is breaching the terms of their agreement in any other ways aside from rent arrears, am I able to issue a termination notice? Unlikely would be the answer in this 6-month period, I would imagine, Charlotte. You will be, in most instances, if it's a rent arrears issue, but you will be able to still make an application to the tribunal. It will be heard, and they will be able to breach that. So, again, in Dogman's situation, we'll be able to go for a specific performance order, and hopefully they will give us an order that dog must go. So it's not all, as I said, Dogman hasn't got all his own way. Suresh says, is there a landlord relief for rates and land taxes? What a great question, Suresh. I think you actually wrote to me on this topic, and I sent that message out a couple of messages ago in regards to land tax. I know a lot of our clients are paying land tax, and I know right now the next instalment is due pretty well around now. And people are saying, should I hold off? Should I pay it? Well, I certainly can't advocate do not pay it when it's due. I've had a number of conversations, and firstly, let me thank our clients who lobbied, and I asked them to join in a lobbying, your local member, the Treasurer and the Minister for Small Business and Finance to say, as landlords, we want and need this this land tax relief. So Suresh, in answer to your question, I haven't got an answer now, but saying that, last Sunday afternoon, I had a video Zoom hookup with myself, Damien Tudor, who is the Minister for Small Business and Finance, and about 3 other industry leaders where, again, the question you asked, what are you guys doing? And in some ways it was heartening, in some ways it was disappointing. I think they're looking to us to try and provide answers, and like all politicians, you wouldn't get a straight answer, but and like a good real estate agent, I kept asking more questions and more questions to try and find out what the hell are you guys going to do. I'm sensing, well, first of all, I'm adamant that they will do something. I am sensing, however, that I don't think it's going to be as attractive as I would like. I'm getting a sense from the questions I pumped that it's going to be potentially on a pro rata basis. By way of example, and it's only my interpretation reading between lines, is that, for example, if you paid land tax for the year of $20,000 and up until March, you were zero affected. So there is expectation the first instalment unaffected, but from now on, for your next instalment, if you have to give a rebate or an adjustment and you are affected by arguably 25% of your rent, and you can demonstrate that, then there'll be an equal pro rata adjustment where you might get a rebate of 25% of the land tax. That's the way I'm sensing. I don't think they understand the gravity and the cost of paying land tax. I know a number of our clients. I have one client in particular who I know has a property we generate about $150,000 a year in revenue for 5 townhouses, and they pay $78,000 in land tax. So I had another client who, if the concept comes true, is actually paying more in land tax than they receive in rent. So Suresh, I'm sorry I haven't given you a definitive answer, but I am adamant something will happen, but I don't believe it'll be as far-reaching as I believe the property industry, the owners, sorry, more importantly, should get. So all I can say, Suresh, is please, and others, stay tuned. Okay, from Morella. What is the likelihood of finding new tenants in this period? Are tenants mainly staying put? Great question. Last week we had 18 pending applications for properties that we are seeing come through. Sales as well. We did have a flurry of people when the announcement was made we couldn't do auctions. There was a bit of a stamping around. I thought it was a bit like people trying to find toilet paper and rice. We had buyers and vendors scrambling to get deals done, and get deals done we did. We had 10 transactions for $15 million in 1 week. That being said, the pipeline of stuff coming up around the corner is quite daunting, and I think, yes, from a selling perspective, there are people absolutely, I think, not going to do anything, sit back, and I think we're going to be in some very lean times and challenging times on the selling front in the foreseeable future. But in regards to tenancies, the reality is that people are definitely going to need a roof over their head. That being said, I do predict that vacancy factors will rise as people move back home with mum and dad. My daughter moved back from Melbourne, come back with mum and dad. We love you, Emily, and glad to see you at home. And I'm sure other families are having their prodigal children come back too, and I'm sure you're welcoming them with open arms. I did have a humorous conversation with one of our salespeople who was saying, what's going to happen in the market? I said, it's going to be great in the sales perspective. I said, in 10 months' time, we're going to have a baby boom and people are going to want to move, and we're going to have many divorces as people are forced to live with each other. So we've got to look at the bright side of all these things. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand when we do get up and running. We just got to get through this tough period until we get the green light that business as, I won't say back to normal because the normal won't exist in the future, but as normal as we can possibly expect. So, Marilla, I hope that's answered your question. Carly, how are we going for time? We're on time. Okay. Nella. Oh, this is a great question and one I can't answer. Do you think the government will reimburse loss of rent to landlords? Great question. I don't know. If you'd asked me this morning, would the government pay my childcare for free? I would have said, no, they won't. I don't know. No, maybe. And again, they have said there will be more relief packages for landlords, certainly in a commercial space. And there are a lot of commercial landlords absolutely bleeding at the moment. If you owned a gym, if you owned a beautician, how is the tenant going to pay rent? So there has to be relief in the commercial side, and I believe that's coming. Will it extend through to residential? Hopefully is the answer for that. Amy asked a question. Any chance in strata fee reductions in this period? Great question, and I've been reading a lot. Has come across my inbox, which is overflowing at the moment, but the inboxes and what I've read from most strata managers and executive committees are getting on the front foot. They're very conscious that a lot of people are being laid off, times are tough. Again, they're looking at things like grace periods, not charging interest, coming to payment plans. Again, you won't not have to pay your strata levies. There'll just be a deferment of that obligation and maybe a mitigation of some interest penalties, and they certainly won't be putting you out on the street because you haven't paid the levies. It's a lot more easier in reality for a strata corporation to recoup the money than it might be from a landlord. Tenants can run away. Sure, we'll track them down vigorously, but sometimes challenging. Whereas if you own a property, a strata unit, Amy, it's going to be very hard for you to run away from that obligation. So strata managers, executive committees are being very flexible from what I've seen come across my desk. Time for a couple more questions before we will need to wrap up. One from Andrew says, what happens if you have given a reduction and the lease expires in 6 months and the tenant leaves without paying us back? Tenants would never do that, Andrew. Good question. Again, it's like it's the same principles on what you're thinking of. Rent, mortgage, legally, same obligations. You have to pay it. Now, the ability, like strata levies, in Amy's situation, it's very easy to recoup strata levies if someone doesn't pay it. It's more challenging to recoup if a tenant flies, but notwithstanding, as I advocated earlier tonight, subject to our client's consent, we would be recommending, if they stop paying the rent, that we treat it like anything else. And if the debt accumulates, and there will be in some cases a significant accumulation of rent arrears come this 6 month period, because our hands are tied, we can't actually do much as far as getting a recalcitrant tenant out who's not playing by the rules and not even contributing to the rent when we know they can. As a society, as taxpayers, you're getting $1,500 a week. Why aren't you contributing back to the landlord? So I'd be vigorously pursuing that person for their obligations. And again, there are legal ramifications, debt collections, and at the end of the day, getting an application from tribunal. And our property managers, in the old days, you used to be able to just put a tenant on tenant national databases for bad tenants. Fortunately, I think that's changed where you just can't go and do that because you don't like the tenant. You actually have to have an order from the tribunal now, and we are able to do that. That's a very good question. There was another question that came through in regards to Devine Real Estate and what fees. Would you guys reduce your fees and things like that? Well, the reality is we are absolutely earning less fees. We earn fees on the income that we collect. So if we're only collecting half of the rent, then we're only charging you half of the fee. I could argue that we're probably at the moment doing twice the work for half the amount. And again, I'll put a shout out for our property managers for doing the right thing. Saying that too, like every business, it's very tough out there, and certainly cash flow projections into the future are going to be very challenging. We've certainly made application for the rent keeper allowances because we have no doubt that in coming months our business unquestionably is going to fall down in revenue, and we want to avoid, where possible, having to lay staff off who've been the foundation of our business. But equally, we run a commercial business, and we want to be there for our clients. But if we don't have revenue, we can't pay people. How can we help you? So we're feeling the pain just as much as you guys are. And yes, our fees are effectively being reduced. The time it takes, the vacancy factor has gone up. It's taking us more time. The number of inspections that we've got to do now, private inspections, just think about that. Every time we want to rent your property, 2 Saturdays ago, we were just able to open up for 20 minutes and half a dozen people, 10 people might turn up. It's a lot more efficient now for those same 10 people to look at it. We've had to engage more staff, more resources, so that we can get your properties rented quicker when they do. But I appreciate the question, the sentiment, and absolutely, as a business, we are doing everything to protect your interests, and we're feeling the pain just as much as you. So I appreciate that comment. Question here from David: landlords cannot terminate a lease for 6 months if the tenant cannot pay the rent. Why is the landlord taking the extra financial burden when they may have lost their job during this and could be having difficulty paying their mortgages? David, don't know how to answer that except to say you're 100% right. There's a lot of injustices out there at the moment, and the earlier question about will the government step up and come to the party in such circumstances, I certainly would like to think so. Again, if you get, circumstances mean you have to sell up and cut a loss, and selling in this next 6 months will be probably a challenge. You certainly won't get the money you would have got if you sold in February. But the reality is that the bank's not going to cut a loss. So I do think, David, that the government, in example you just gave there, I feel really should come to the party, but there may be some news on that front shortly. So all I can say is stay tuned. If there is pain out there, talk to us. We'll guide you through as best we can. If selling is an option, there are definitely still buyers out there. We are getting very good results in some of the cases, but the volume of transaction, I think that's one of the factors at the moment that is actually underpinning not bad prices, because a lot of clients just said it's all too hard. I don't have to sell, get my property off the market. So we're unquestionably seeing less properties on the market. Now, supply and demand, if there are less properties on the market and still a pool of buyers out there, prices I think for the time being will be stable. But again, it's a revolving door, and the big question is how quickly can we get a cure, can we get back into business and get moving on that front. Okay, here's a question from Ian. Ian says, good evening, Steve. Good evening, Ian. Well done on taking the initiative for this webinar, thank you. I'm an overseas landlord. I don't know where you are, but maybe good morning. Okay, as an overseas landlord, some great advice. I believe there is much more to unfold. Yep. And so the point, I say a couple of weeks' time, it might be good to run another one of these. Couldn't agree with you more. And again, as I said earlier, Ian, it is a moving target. It is changing by the day, by the hour. And again, information we gave you tonight may potentially be obsolete. There might be a more effective way of dealing with some of the challenges that we have. But as a business, we are as nimble as we possibly can. I keep harping on the fact that our clients have to come first. I'm emphasising this to our staff like you wouldn't believe. A week ago, we were contemplating a full lockdown where we would not be able to show your property. We would not be able to effectively sell your property, but we were creative. We'd come up with ideas where we might be able to not get around, but work with the limitations that we've got from home. A lot of our staff are working from home now, and we're looking at all the initiatives. So 100% we will be running more of these, whether they're live webinars like this, or we just simply do a video and we'll send that video out to you. One thing I'm 100% committed to, that we will keep you as informed as we possibly can. I think we're just about timed out. I can't thank everybody enough for, one, the feedback that you've been giving us. The generosity shown is very humbling. Martin for his insight. Can't believe it, 10 years to get a piece of legislation through and 10 days for another. What do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention, and things like tonight, very much like that. So thank you for your time tonight. I welcome any questions and feedback. I know we've been trying to answer some of the questions that they've come through tonight. We will do this is recorded, and we will send this out to people who need, possibly tomorrow, but certainly by Friday, and we'll keep you as informed as we possibly can. So thanks for everyone for your time tonight. Take care and stay healthy, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks very much.